In this in this webinar, you will be understanding about integration DNS with Active Directory. So this is very interesting topic and very useful topic and a very important topic. Let us go understand. See, we have already covered something related to Active Directory. Okay. Now, I don't want this. I want to bring domain controller. I hope you all know what is domain controller. If you don't know Active Directory, if you don't know what is domain controller, you have to visit the previous videos to understand what is domain and what is domain controller and Active Directory. If you are well known with this thing, and you can continue this session. Say here we have a domain called Ekascloud.com. Ekascloud.com is a domain. So what I did, I installed Active Directory with the name of Ekascloud.com domain. Once I install Active Directory, this is the computer which contains Active Directory as well as DNS 172.30.0.10. And I told you, right, this is a domain controller and as well as DNS server. So where I install Active Directory, that computer itself acts as a DNS. So what I am going to do now, and in this session we will be understanding about how DNS can integrate it with Active Directory and what is the major benefit of using Active Directory in DNS and what is the major importance role play of DNS. So what I have to do is, before entering into this concept, I have to bring one client computer icon. Let's imagine this is your client PC. This is going to be my client PC. This PC contains 172.30.0.20 IP address. So what I want is, I want to make this computer is a member of domain controller, which means under domain. So when I want to make the member of domain, what should I do here? I should go and configure the preferred DNS, right? Without preferred DNS, it is not possible to make the member of domain. So I should configure preferred DNS IP address. So preferred DNS IP address must be given to this client PC. Once I gave the preferred DNS, I will be able to join this computer into domain. Then we have to understand how can we join this. So what I have did here is, I installed Active Directory and DNS, including DNS in this computer. Let me go and show you here. We go to tab and C1. In this computer, I will have to log in. I will log in once again with the right password. Once I log in, I go to start and go with the Active Directory users and computers tool. If I open Active Directory users and computers tool, so there I can find Ekascloud.com, and here you can find domain controller is server 1. and if you click computers, we don't have any client computers in the domain, and I wanted to join computers in the domain. So what I do is I will go to C2 PC, which is computer 2, and I will go to NICard and I will check the properties of NIC card. What IP address I have? 172.30.0.10. So once IP address is given, what I will do, I will go to run in the client PC. As usual, you know this command, sysdm.cpl. So in this configuration, I go to change domain, and the domain name is ekascloud.com. When I say ekascloud.com, so here is, I will click OK, and it is asking who are you. I will say administrator. And password of the administrator. When I say OK, you know what happens, how it resolves. So let us understand step by step, one by one, in detail about what's happening in the background. So what should I do now? I go to tab and notebook. While during member join, let's go here. Consider, let me bring two computers here. I just wanted to explain you what's happening in the background step by step. Let me bring that domain controller icon and client PC icon. So let me explain you what happens. What happened when you join the computer in the domain. This is a thing, and I can say one more thing. And what is the major important role play in this of DNS? So let's see what happens first. The first step is DNS query will go. The first step is DNS query. Let's type here DNS query. For what? For resolving domain name. And how can I see all this? So what I have to do, I just go back to C2. I will go here and I will start network monitor tool so that I can show you what happens in the background. This is very important when you came to troubleshoot. I cancel everything. I will go to command prompt in the client too. I say flush DNS because the DNS client cache memory should go out. And I say sysdm.cpl, change domain name and say ekascloud.com. When I say ekascloud.com, and I will start network capture. Now the capture is started. When the capture is going on and say ekascloud.com, let's go and stop the capture and see the data about DNS. If I apply filter with the DNS, let us see for in detailed. Let us see, understand carefully what is the DNS query. The DNS query, it is going from where? It is going from client 2, C2, going to server 1, going to C1. For what purpose the query is going? The query for is underscore Ldap dot underscore TCP dot underscore DC dot MSDS, which means if I explain you something here, the query going for underscore Ldap underscore dot underscore TCP dot DC dot Ekascloud.com. So we have to understand here the foremost thing and very important thing is, what is this Ldap, what is TCP, what is DC, what is this? So this DNS query is generated. The DNS query is generated. Where it is going? It is going to DNS server, which means when you want to join a computer, who is helping? DNS is helping. How DNS is helping? And what is this query mean? What is this record? So we have seen lot of record, NS record, SOA record, host record, and some other records in previous videos. But what this query record for? Why it is generating? We have to know this. If you have any queries, so you please post a comment in the below so that I can answer your questions. Now let us go and understand in detail what is this. I think I have missed something. Just a minute. Underscore go to C1 TCP DC dot MSDCS. Sorry for this, I have missed the main thing is MSDCS. Let me write from the first. What is here? Underscore Ldap underscore Ldap dot underscore TCP dot DC dot MSDCS dot Ekascloud.com. Okay, so we have to understand what is this query for, why DNS is generating this query to a DNS server, what is there in this. So while entering into this, imagine when you installed Active Directory in this computer and DNS, DNS is automatically installed. DNS is automatically installed, and what I have to say is the domain DNS is known as dynamic DNS. Domain DNS is known as dynamic DNS. What is dynamic DNS? It will create and update records dynamically. It will create and update records dynamically. That is called dynamic DNS. You understood? So dynamic DNS. So how it works? Let us go and understand clearly how the dynamic DNS works. So we go to tab and we go to C1 and I go to start, search for DNS Manager console. I'll open DNS Manager. Under DNS, under forward lookup, you see MSDCS zone. So there is a MSDCS zone is created. What is this zone for? What it contains? Why this record? So understand what is that zone purpose. What is MSDCS? See, this session could be a very complicated. We have to understand what is MSDCS zone. If you see the full form, Microsoft Domain Controller Services. Microsoft Domain Controller Services. So which means all the service records will be stored in the zone. What I'm saying, all domain services records, all domain service records, you can say service records are stored in this zone. So all the service records will be stored in MSDCS zone. Understand? So now let's see what is service record. What is service record? The next understand is what is service record. In other words, we can say SRV record, service SRV record, service location record. The service location record is used to identify the server service in the domain. It is used to identify the server service. What are the server services? What are all the server services in under domain? There are so many server services. Let us list a few services. Ldap service, Kerberos service, and we have global catalog service, Netlogon, and K passwords, and so many services are there in this domain. We have to understand what is Ldap now. So now understanding Ldap. Okay, what is Ldap full form? Lightweight directory access protocol. Lightweight directory access protocol. So I will summarize whatever we discussed here. We had a domain controller and with the Ekascloud.com. When we try to join the domain, what request has went from DNS client to DNS server? There is a request. What request has went? __ ldap.tcp.dc. so and so. So when I try to explore what is MSDCS, then we came to know MSDCS is zone. If what is DCS zone, it contains some service record. What is service record? It used to resolve domain services. And what is the first service? We have like Ldap. And understanding what is Ldap. If you are not able to understand, you have to watch this video 2-3 times. Then only you can understand. So what is Ldap? So Ldap is a open standard protocol. Ldap is an open standard protocol used to query the NTDS database. What is NTDS database? NTDS is an Active Directory database. Imagine you have a database here. You may have one database here. If you want to query to database, if you want to put something into the database, if you want to query to get something in the database, and if you want to modify in the database, what do you want? You want Ldap protocol. So this is NTDS database. Ldap is a protocol so that you can access it. We will have some other detailed subject about Ldap in some other class. As of now, so Ldap is a protocol which to query, modify and access the NTDS database. This is enough for today's class. I can go deeper in the subject which you may not be able to understand as of now, and further classes we will understand. If you have any queries, please post your questions in a comment section so that I will explain you. No questions, right? Let's move on. So let's go back to the server in tab C1. If you look at here under MSDCS zones, and you can find DC. Under DC you can find TCP. Under TCP you will find one Ldap service location record. What this record says? This record says who is the Ldap server for the Ekascloud.com. Who is the Ldap server for the Ekascloud.com? You tell me, when you install Active Directory in C1 computer, who needs to run that service? I told you that Ldap is a protocol to access to query to the database. So if somebody wants to create an account, if somebody wants to make the member of domain, Ldap has to run. So how Ldap will work? If you want to make this computer into domain member, Ldap has to be resolved. Who resolving Ldap? DNS. How DNS is resolving? By asking a query. When the query is requesting and generating to DNS, DNS already has record. So which means what I am trying to say, whenever somebody wanted to join the domain, Ldap has to resolve, Ldap has to work. So before Ldap, DNS query will go and resolve who is Ldap server. So by default, who is Ldap server? Active Directory server will be acting as a Ldap server. So it is running with Ldap services, and that's why you will be having one record for Ldap. So what does it mean? Who is Ldap server for Ekascloud.com? So what this record saying? This record saying server1 dot Ekascloud, which means server1 is the Ldap server for the Ekascloud. And what is the port number for Ldap? 389 is the port number. So who resolving all this? DNS resolving it. Who resolving all this? DNS resolving. How DNS resolving? Now see, Ldap, TCP, DC. So after receiving this query request, now DNS query sending is response with the got it right IP address. If you have any query, please post till this. Now you may ask one question. The question is, sir, who created this information? Who created Ldap query request Kerberos? You have so many options, right, in this zone. So who created? Who created this? Who created? There is a service called Netlogon. That Netlogon will create all this information in the DNS. Okay, we will understand little bit later. Now I go to, so once the DNS query has been resolved, who is Ldap server, the result has to, which means the query should come out. So what that it says, DNS query resolving for domain name as well as Ldap, DNS query with the IP address, DNS query with Ldap server's IP address. Who is Ldap server here? The Ldap server is the same PC where the Active Directory is running. Do you understand? Any queries you have, you please post comment here. So finally DNS is helping to resolving Ldap service. If DNS resolved, if DNS doesn't resolve Ldap service, then you cannot be joined into domain. Do you understand? Let's see here. In capture I will say Ldap. Say Ldap, apply, and you will see here one query request. This query request for what? Source 20, destination server 1. It is going Ldap request, search request. So when you try to join the domain, so first DNS came, resolve Ldap. Who is Ldap? After that Ldap is sending a request. Ldap is sending a request called search request. This protocol is generated, this query is generated by Ldap. What is doing? Search request. It is requesting search request to make the member of domain. The computer needs to join into domain, so that's why Ldap is sending. Who resolves Ldap? DNS. How DNS resolves Ldap? By using that existing MS DCS zone under zone. So after, when the search request comes to domain controller, what happens? This server, server will authenticate. The server will authenticate. How it authenticate? It will ask, hello boss, who are you? Who are you to join? So when there is some service which interrupts the whole concept, this service, I will tell you what service is interrupting, but you will be having some interruption. This is what happening in C2. If you go to C2, so you see there is something is welcome security, sorry, Windows security. In that you have to type the username, password, which means somebody is giving this message to you, which means which is login authentication to you, and you have to submit the username and password. So who is sending the request? This is called Netlogon. Netlogon is a service. So what is Netlogon? So Netlogon is a service which authenticate whoever logging into domain controller, which means whoever logging into joining into domain, Netlogon will always authenticate by using Kerberos. If you see the result in the capture, no, not in this one, C1. See Netlogon protocol. When Ldap request goes, Netlogon asking, what is asking? Who is Sam logon request? It is asking who are you to login. We have to Ldap resultant Netlogon attribute. It is asking when I gave a right password to that. When I give a right password, I submit the right password. Let's see what happens when I submit the right password. What happens is when I submit the right password, the another protocol will appear. Let's go and start the network monitor tool again. I will type username password. So I'll say OK. So what happened in the background? So when I submit this, it is saying welcome to Ekascloud. And here we have to understand what's actually happening. So who resolving all this? When I submit the username and password, the another protocol will come in for doing this authentication. That protocol called Kerberos, the protocol which help us to access Kerberos. What is Kerberos protocol? Kerberos is a protocol which to authenticate and validate and authorize. So it will authorized. So it will allow. It will send. So Kerberos request will go, and again DNS has to come resolve who is Kerberos. DNS should resolve. So Kerberos is also one of the server service. Kerberos also should resolve. How Kerberos will resolve the service? Let's go here. We go to C1. I will just search for Ldap. We have Ldap alone, Ldap service. I will filter with Kerberos. Kerberos v5 is a option. That's a protocol. Here we have Kerberos authentication. I will stop. When I see Kerberos authentication, see submitting username called administrator. submitting username called administrator. Then Kerberos responding with a ticket. So there is a TGS, ticket granting session, and Kerberos ticket granting ticket. So before that, if I go to DNS, you will see one Kerberos record called SRV running with 88 port. Who is Kerberos server? Server 1. Who is Ldap server? Server 1. So how these all records are created? By using Netlogon. When Netlogon got created? During installation of Active Directory and promoting to a domain controller. So MSDCS is a zone which contains service records. And what is the service record? Ldap record, Kerberos record, and we may see understand GC record also in later concept. Let us till this we cover. So till Ldap record, Kerberos record, and how Kerberos works. See, Kerberos works in different way. What is Kerberos? Is doing authentication and validating. So when you send authentication request, Kerberos will have something called Kerberos key distribution center. This key distribution center will provide tickets. So once a user succeed with a username and password, and Kerberos will give one ticket. The ticket contains everything. When he log in, when the Kerberos ticket authentication, which means, so whenever he want to do any activity in the client PC, he will submit the ticket and authorized it. Whether he can change the time or not, whether he can go to control panel or not, everything. Do you understand what I am trying to say? So how this all happen? By using DNS integrated with AD. When DNS is integrated with AD, all this happens automatically. So first DNS resolves and Ldap come and Netlogon request. Then Kerberos will go and Kerberos response will come. After that only, when Kerberos responds back, then only you will see something called in client PC say welcome to Ekascloud. Once you see this message, once you see this, and we go C1, and you go to users and computers, refresh, you will see server 2. How this server 2 account created? It was not there before authentication, all this. Now it is here because Ldap came, authorized it, Kerberos came, allowed it, everything is done. That's why server 2 has record is created. If you have any queries, please raise your questions in comment section. I will stop this session here, just because I just wanted to keep a very simple and a small session. I can go in depth, but we will have another session to go in depth. If you don't have any questions, you just end up this session. If you have anything, you please raise questions. And yes, I got one question from user ID and password. Mr. Shaul Hamid is asking, user ID and password used here is local ID or ID created in Azure AD. See, while you joining into domain, when you try to join into domain, you must use administrative, which means the user which is there in Active Directory. Which means, what does it mean? Say here you have a user, you have user account. When you try to join this computer into domain, you should submit this username to join into domain. You cannot use local user. So you must use Active Directory database user account to make the member of domain, not the local user. I hope you understood this. Any session, any queries regarding this? I hope you understood, you got the answer. Okay, if it is nothing, then I will end up this session. Yeah, I got one more question. Will these all process happen for each client while joining into domain at each time? Yes. Yes, which means, so whenever we join, whenever a client PC join into domain, what few these steps will happen definitely. DNS query will come, resolve Ldap and Ldap search request, Netlogon, authenticate, then Kerberos goes and check and come back. Now tell me, you are running a domain controller. Okay, let me bring something like this. You are running a domain with a one domain controller. What are the major services are working here? Active Directory, DNS, Ldap, Netlogon and Kerberos. Just imagine your Active Directory gone, so nothing will work, right? And DNS, if the DNS down, then everything is working. Then what happens? You will not be able to resolve the name to IP. You will not be able to resolve any Ldap service or Kerberos service. So Ldap has to run. And Ldap disabled, DNS working, Netlogon working, Kerberos working. What happens? You will not be able to query to Active Directory. No users can join, nothing will happen. Netlogon stops. All this DNS package, DNS created, configured by Netlogon only. Okay, now Netlogon stop, DNS will not work. If DNS not works, Ldap will not work. If Ldap will not work, Active Directory will not function properly. And imagine, now you disable Kerberos. What happens? Nobody will authenticate. So when you want to run Active Directory properly, so what you have to do? All these services should run properly. AD should run, DNS should run, Ldap should run, Netlogon, everything. That's why when we install Active Directory, all the services automatically install and configure dynamically. Who created all this? Netlogon created this. Any queries here now? I hope Mr. Raj Tilak understood this one. Okay, nice session. Actually, I can go in detail, but this is enough. This is enough. We will meet on the next week again, and we'll continue the same how the remaining thing happens. Okay, I'm just going to end up this session. Thank you for watching and thank you for attending this session.